The big stage. Democratic presidential candidates hold their final debate before Super Tuesday. We'll tell you who had to fight off the most attacks. Warning signs. The deadly coronavirus outbreak continues to spread around the world. How the United States is responding. No chance to vote. Two pro-life measures once again are stalled on Capitol Hill. We have analysis. And ready for Lent. Pope Francis delivers a message to the faithful on how best to spend the weeks leading to Easter. On EWTN News Nightly for Ash Wednesday, February 26, 2020. Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. It was an all-out battle last night on the debate stage in South Carolina. And while the 7 candidates vying for the Democratic presidential nomination took jabs at one another, it was frontrunner Bernie Sanders who took the most heat. Senator Sanders was feeling the burn at last night's debate.
Bernie and I agree on a lot of things, but I think I would make a better president.
Bernie, in fact, hasn't passed much of anything.
Imagine spending the better part of 2020 with Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump.
I'm hearing my name mentioned a little bit tonight.
The candidates taking swipes at Sanders and also beating up on him about past comments.
Bernie voted 5 times against the Brady bill.
And current campaign promises.
Bernie Sanders' analysis is right. The difference is I don't like his solutions.
Other candidates talked about how their problem-solving skills made them the right candidate for the job, like Mike Bloomberg.
I have been training for this job since I stepped on the pile that was still smoldering on 9/11. I know what to do. I've shown I know how to run a country.
Well, I'm not out of time.
The candidates also made a push to appeal to African-American voters who make up more than 60% of the Democratic electorate in South Carolina. It is a crucial vote for any campaign, but especially Joe Biden, who is struggling.
I intend to win South Carolina, and I will win the African-American vote here in South Carolina.
But as the saying goes, talk is cheap. The proof will be at the polls on Saturday.
It's not just who talks the best, who actually gets things done. And especially with the African-American community, there have been a lot of broken promises.
Joining me now to discuss last night's debate is Philip Crowther, international affiliate reporter for the Associated Press. Philip, welcome back. So it was Senator Bernie Sanders' turn in the hot seat last night. How did the new frontrunner do?
Well, it was a tough one for him because this was the very first time that he was literally center stage here in Charleston. He is now the front runner for the nomination of the Democratic Party, and that, of course, leads to attacks from all sides. This debate yesterday at times was so loud that we couldn't really make out who was attacking whom. Speaking of loud, by the way, they're deconstructing a stage here behind us, so you might hear some of that construction noise. But those attacks on Bernie Sanders, as I said, came from all sides. First of all, for example, from Senator Elizabeth Warren. She says that Bernie Sanders might be a progressive, but that his ideas are not realistic. She is the one who can actually turn those ideas into policy as president. But then there are also the many moderates on stage who are essentially taking votes away from each other right now, all of them attacking Senator Bernie Sanders, the likes of former New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg, former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, and of course former Vice President Joe Biden, all of them going after Bernie Sanders because of that newfound status as the front runner for the nomination in the Democratic Party.
Well, speaking of former Vice President Joe Biden, I know he's called South Carolina his firewall. Today, he actually received endorsement of the House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn in a state where the African-American vote really does carry a lot of weight. What impact do you think that Biden's performance last night will have going into Saturday's primary?
Well, his performance was a little bit different to what we've seen from former Vice President Biden over the last few months. He was angrier. He shouted himself as well. It may be because he's feeling the pressure. He has said that he needs to win South Carolina. If not, if he doesn't win on Saturday, then the pressure on him to drop out of the race will be pretty big indeed. That endorsement, by the way, from Jim Clyburn, that's a really big deal for the former vice president, and he is certainly making the most of it today because it precisely is about what he needs here in South Carolina. The African-American vote, this is the very first state the first in the South that votes with a very large African American population. Joe Biden traditionally has their support, and he is banking on keeping their support here and making that into a victory for him on Saturday. Again, if it doesn't work out for Joe Biden here in the South Carolina primary on Saturday, it might be curtains for him. It might be time for him to leave the race altogether.
Well, Philip, quickly looking ahead to Super Tuesday, which is less than a week away, how critical is next week's contest?
Well, let's put it this way. We had 7 people on stage, 7 candidates yesterday here in the debate in Charleston. The next one isn't until after Super Tuesday. We can say for sure that there will be fewer than 7 candidates on stage in that next debate in Arizona, because there will be a culling of candidates after Super Tuesday. Those who don't have enough money anymore, those who haven't received enough votes, and maybe even within those many moderate candidates, there might be some who are saying it's time to really get out of the race so that one moderate candidate might be able to take on Bernie Sanders for that nomination of the Democratic Party. Super Tuesday, that's 14 states altogether that will be voting in their primaries. Afterwards, we should have a pretty clear sign of where this nomination contest is going. And current indications are that that will be going towards Bernie Sanders.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Philip Crowther, international affiliate reporter for the Associated Press. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
President Donald Trump is pushing back against criticism his administration is not doing enough to battle the coronavirus. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has warned the American public to prepare for an outbreak of the disease. There are more than 80,000 cases around the world, but relatively few so far in the U.S. Correspondent Owen Jensen reports now from the White House. Owen.
Tracy, concerns over the coronavirus are front and center here in Washington tonight. Now, the CDC is recommending that you take extra precautions to stay safe. Meanwhile, they want to spend $2.5 billion to fight it. Some say that's not enough money.
Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar went before lawmakers today. It was clear from the very start what's on everyone's mind.
I want to start with a matter of urgency. The novel coronavirus, COVID-19. Cases are growing, as is alarm. This is both domestically and internationally.
Secretary Azar tried to allay those concerns.
The immediate risk to the American public remains low, but there is now community transmission in a number of countries, including outside of Asia, which is deeply concerning.
About 81,000 people around the globe have been sickened by the coronavirus. The illness has spread to more than 36 countries. In the United States, so far, the numbers are low.
We are working closely with state, local, and private sector partners to prepare for mitigating the virus's potential spread in the United States, as we expect to see more cases here.
Mr. Secretary, I support your declaration of a public health emergency. We are dealing with the likelihood of a global pandemic.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is requesting $8.5 billion to fight the illness, and President Trump is fighting back against critics, saying they're, quote, doing everything possible to make the coronavirus look as bad as possible, including panicking markets, if possible. Likewise, their incompetent do-nothing Democrat comrades are all talk, no action.
President Trump will be meeting with experts from the CDC tonight, answering questions. As you know, there is no vaccine for this virus. One thing the CDC says you can do, just like your mom told you when you were a kid, wash your hands with soap and water. Tracy?
All right. Thank you, Owen. Correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight from the White House. Thanks again. Pope Francis celebrates Ash Wednesday Mass at Rome's oldest basilica, Santa Sabina. Every year, the Pope celebrates Ash Wednesday with a short procession on the historic Aventine Hill. This tradition dates back to the 6th century when St. Pope Gregory the Great, who decided to visit the Roman station churches during Lent. The North American College of Seminarians follow this tradition by celebrating Mass at a different church in Rome every day during the Lenten season. Andrea Gagliarducci, EWTN News Vatican analyst, joins us now. Thanks for joining us, Andrea. Andrea, so what was the Pope's message?
So Pope Francis focused his homily on the dust. You know, there is a way to be dust and to go from dust to life, according to Pope Francis. We are dust because we are just dust at the eyes of God. And we are dust that can be forgiven by God because we are beloved by God. But also there is a passage from life to dust, according to the Pope. And we pass from life to dust when we just discard the people, when we just don't love, when we discard the unborn children, the unwelcome children, the poor, the refugee. So Pope Francis gives us the recipe to be beloved by God, to be in relation with God, to remember that we are dust, and at the same time to go to penance, to understand that we can be forgiven for our mistakes, not to stay as a dust, but to pass from dust to life.
Well, the Pope warned the faithful of worldliness and even hypocrisy, even inside the church. What do you think he's referring to?
Well, this is one of the main themes of Pope Francis in all of his homilies. There are some main themes that the Pope usually uses, and they're not necessarily connected with the reality, with something that is happening now. Hypocrisy, worldliness, even corruption, these are some of the most important themes to Pope Francis. These come from his Jesuit legacy, from Jesuit spiritual exercises. Hypocrisy is connected with duplicity. The Pope often spoke about the terrorism of gossip, even within the Curia. But it's not referred to some particular situation. It's referred to a general situation that is in the Church as a danger for the Church.
Andrea, what's the Pope's schedule like during this Lenten season?
Well, the Pope, during this season, the Pope is going to just have another penitential rite on March the 20th. And then there will be Easter celebrations. So it will be just kind of mild. Next week there will be Lenten spiritual exercises, and the Pope will go in a place outside of Rome that is called Riccia. It's a small place in the Roman castles, in the Roman neighborhood. It's a place for spiritual exercises with all the Curia members, and he will stay there actually in vacation to meditate, to pray, and to recover during Lenten. And then we'll see, there will be the Easter celebrations. We still don't know where the Pope is going to have the Holy Thursday Mass, the Last Supper Mass, and we will know just in the end.
On another note, the Vatican sent out practical measures on hygiene to all Vatican departments. Do you think the coronavirus will affect future Vatican events?
Well, it will affect a little some Vatican events. Some of the events that are open to public are going to be postponed, mostly because some of these events implied the travelers, people that were coming from outside of Italy, that for reasons of prudence are preferring not to come to Italy, not to come to Rome. But in general, the Vatican is just having some prudent measures, just like emptying the holy fonts, the water fonts, but nothing special. Everything will be on schedule. Pope Francis tomorrow will have a closed-door meeting with the priests of the Diocese of Rome. This meeting has not been cancelled. The Pope will have this penitential rite on March the 20th. This penitential rite has not been cancelled. The churches are well attended. I was this morning at Ashes Wednesday Mass, and it was inside the Vatican. It was attended by most of the Vatican employees. So I don't think it's going to affect the Vatican that much, with the exception of the public events. Yes, in that case, it's because of the guests.
All right, Andrea, thank you so much for your insight. Andrea Gallioducci, EWTN News Vatican analyst. Thanks again.
Thank you.
In the Philippines, priests are changing the way they mark people on this Ash Wednesday. Instead of making the sign of the cross on the forehead, they are sprinkling ashes on top of the head to avoid physical contact and to fight the spread of the coronavirus.
The sprinkling of ashes on one's crown is actually an older tradition. It is taken from the first book of Maccabees in the Old Testament.
The changes come after new guidance from the Bishops' Conference of the Philippines. It recommended the changes to keep parishioners safe. The Philippines is the largest Catholic country in Asia. And the president of the Philippines is defending his decision to stop participating in a training program with the U.S. military. President Rodrigo Duterte said in a speech earlier today that Philippines forces can fight Muslim extremists without American military help. He was also angered by statements made by President Barack Obama on a deadly crackdown on drug dealers. And he said he will not be accepting an invitation from President Trump to come to Southeast Asia Summit in Las Vegas next month. In Syria, airstrikes killed 19 people over the past 2 days, including students and teachers at a school. Airstrikes on a school in the provincial capital of Idlib killed 2 girls and a teacher. Syrian forces captured more villages in the northwestern part of the country. They are backed by Russian air power, and a delegation from Russia arrived in Turkey today to resume talks at easing the fighting. Coming up, a preview of the annual gathering of conservative leaders just outside the nation's capital. The President and First Lady released a message on this Ash Wednesday saying, in part, the imposition of ashes is an invitation to spend time during Lent fasting, praying, and engaging in acts of charity. This powerful and sacred tradition reminds us of our shared mortality, Christ's saving love, and the need to repent and accept the gospel more fully. An annual gathering of political conservatives will soon host the president and vice president. Correspondent Mark Irons reports now from CPAC, where he also spoke with Catholics working as volunteers. Mark.
Tracy, the stage is still going up behind me, but we were able to find a number of Catholics drawn here to the Conservative Political Action Conference because of President Trump's opposition to abortion. Now, over the next few days, Catholics will have the opportunity to go to daily Mass here, and on this Ash Wednesday, they were easy to spot. Setup started early this morning, the stage being prepared for a long list of conservative activists and politicians. And in a side room, preparation for Easter begins with an Ash Wednesday service.
This is the beginning of the holiest season, Ash Wednesday, a time of sacrificing, fasting. It's very important to our family.
Elaine, a Catholic with fresh ashes, is here volunteering with a group that sells President Trump towels.
I'm here to help my friends who are responsible for the Trump towel.
She's surrounded by other booths sponsored by conservative groups and backers of President Trump. Attendees will have the opportunity to hear from speakers over the next few days and even have the chance at CPAC to receive the sacraments.
Lots of Catholics attend. I was so excited to see on the schedule they have Mass Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday nights.
The conference gets underway this evening with speeches and discussions. Vice President Mike Pence will address the crowd tomorrow, and on Saturday, President Trump will take the podium. Tracy.
Correspondent Mark Irons reporting for us tonight. Thank you, Mark. Well, CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, brings together lawmakers and conservative leaders for the annual event. More than 19,000 people attended last year's gathering. Here to give us a preview of this year's conference is Ian Walters, Director of Communications for the American Conservative Union. Ian, welcome to the show. So what are some of the key items on this year's conference agenda?
Well, we're going to begin the main stage program tomorrow. Of course, Vice President Mike Pence is the center of the schedule at 11:50. We'll end the conference this year on Saturday, and around 3 o'clock p.m. we'll close with President Donald Trump. All the way in between, we're going to have several members of the administration, cabinet officials, thought leaders, members of the media, to do all sorts of programming that we think it's important to cover with the thousands of grassroots activists that come here to CPAC every year.
How significant is this year's conference, especially as we get closer to the 2020 elections?
As you can imagine, 2020 is a big year. We plan on breaking records attendance-wise. We've got a record number of members of the media covering this event. In addition to that, the American Conservative Union and CPAC has been hosting international events throughout the world, not just across America. So there's a new level of international interest in this year that's very interesting, that I think reflects exactly what's happening in America today, this notion that we're potentially on the verge of America becoming a socialist nation here in just a few months, depending on the results of the election, has a lot of folks, not just in America, concerned, but across the world. I think it's a reminder that America, especially when it comes to questions of religious liberty, is a beacon of hope for folks across the world. The notion that a free people can govern themselves and can push back against dictatorships and tyrannical regimes.
You know, I know that you're moderating a panel today on how not to communicate with undecided voters. What's important to keep in mind when having those discussions?
Well, the folks who are going to be featured on that panel are some of the top communicators in the business. Each one of them has their own unique and personal style. Some of them are seasoned in the sense that they've gone on networks like CNN and been outnumbered 8-1. And so what we want to communicate to the folks that attend CPAC is, how do you keep your composure? Another one is more of a personal storyteller and is well versed in the ways of being able to share personal experience and persuade people that way. Another person is a soundbite expert that's going to show all of the activists who are here how, for when their cameras are on them, how to speak succinctly and in a way that is good for the way reporters cut things in this day and age.
You know, I know you mentioned a number of the guests that you're going to have there at CPAC. Anything else that might be of interest to our viewers?
Well, I don't know if you've heard, but we have a theme every year. The theme for this year's CPAC is America versus Socialism. We really do believe that the folks who attend our event are concerned with the future of America. They're concerned enough to come and stand together this week here at the end of February near Washington, D.C. to make their voice heard. One of the wonderful things about this event is that it's an opportunity for everyone to reconnect, to be with each other. And we know that we're really having an impact. Once this event ends, everybody goes home. They've learned and absorbed new techniques about how to be effective organizing within their community. And we're going to keep an eye on everybody and hope everybody stays in touch and supports one another throughout the year. That's really the point of this thing.
Well, Ian, we really appreciate your time today. Thanks for being with us. Ian Walters, Director of Communications for the American Conservative Union. Thank you again.
Have a blessed Ash Wednesday. We're running off to services right now.
Up next, analysis of why 2 pro-life bills failed to advance on Capitol Hill. Two pro-life measures once again have stalled on Capitol Hill. As we told you yesterday, Senate Democrats blocked the measures. One would have banned most abortions after 20 weeks. The other would have protected babies who survive an abortion attempt. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell accuses Democrats of bowing to radical demands of the left. But Democratic Senator Patty Murray calls the attempted votes a crass political calculation by Republicans. Joining us now to discuss the legislation is Melanie Israel, Research Associate at the Heritage Foundation's DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society. Melanie, welcome back to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so do you think it's a surprise that neither of these proposals made it to a vote?
Unfortunately, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's surprising. However, I think it's very beneficial for the Senate to hold votes on these issues because the American people deserve to know where their members stand on issues like late-term abortion and providing medical care for born-alive infant newborn babies.
Archbishop Joseph Naumann, head of the USCCB Committee on Pro-Life Activities, said in a statement yesterday that most Americans strongly support the 2 proposals. What are your thoughts on that statement?
He's exactly right. We know from polling year after year after year, these are not outliers. This is every year we find that polls show that regardless of a person's political affiliation, their philosophical beliefs, wherever they fall in the political spectrum, the vast majority of Americans are not in favor of elective late-term abortion. They're not in favor of denying care for newborn babies. And so it's incredibly disappointing that our national consensus is not reflected by our elected representatives and current federal law.
Yeah, Melanie, what do you think's next for these 2 bills, and for that matter, any pro-life measure on Capitol Hill?
You know, I think that despite the fact that the result of the votes were disappointing, that doesn't mean that Congress should stop talking about the issue. And there are going to continue to be opportunities for members to stand for the cause of life, particularly during the appropriations process. There are things that members are going to have to stand resolute against pro-abortion attempts to weaken current law. We know that the administration has made a number of gains for the pro-life movement in the regulatory process. And unfortunately, a lot of members on Capitol Hill don't like that. And they're trying to roll back that progress that the administration has made. And so in the months to come, as Congress finishes up this session going into 2020, there's going to still be numerous opportunities for them to defend innocent human life.
Do you think there's any good news for pro-lifers that came from yesterday?
I think it is good to see that both of these votes reflected that there's bipartisan support for these measures. Unfortunately, that support is from mostly Republicans and a handful of Democrats, but you know what? That's better than nothing. And I think a lot of people can be grateful to know that this is not a completely partisan issue, and that's even more so reflected with the general American public.
Well, Melanie, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insight with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, tonight, Pope Francis tells the faithful during Lent we should turn off the television and our smartphones.
Silenzio nel cuore.
At his weekly talk with pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father says the weeks leading to Easter are the perfect time to leave space for God. And we can do that by turning off the TV and opening the Bible. He also says being surrounded by silence is the best way to hear the call of the Lord. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. And we leave you this evening with more images from the Pope's Ash Wednesday Mass and procession. Good night and God bless.